Hello and welcome to this episode of the Housing Geospatial podcast, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything that relates to either housing or geospatial, preferably if there's a little bit of both. Housing Geospatial was formed as we believe place matters for social housing and that geospatial information is woefully underrepresented within the housing sector. This series is around sharing a collective knowledge within the housing sector. You can find our group on either LinkedIn or feel free to head on over to our website at www.housinggeospatial.co.uk. I'm your host, Chris Kinnear, and our guest for this podcast is the ever insightful Steve Litchfield, who is the GIS Manager at Orbit Group. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on, Chris.
So, first question, it's the question we always ask everyone. How are you involved in either housing or geospatial?
Okay, so there's two elements there. Geospatially, I got involved due to a career change some time ago. I chose to challenge myself and study for a degree as a mature student. I chose to get myself into debt and study something new. It had to be something I had a passion for, right? Which I've always had one for maps. So where did that come from? As a child, I was given a whole load of old ordnance survey maps, and I remember my granddad raving about contours on the map, saying, you know, if you look at the collection of contours and how close they are, you can work out how steep a slope is. And it was from that initial sort of enthusiasm from my grandparent. I started looking at maps, looking at the symbology, the colours, the legends that were behind all of the data on the map in front of me, and I just grew to love maps from that. Also, I have a love for the outdoors. Getting up on top of the mountains is where my happy place is. I currently volunteer for an organisation who are trying to create a verified walking network around the country. So I've got a real vested interest in maps. And yeah, that's what led me to having a career in geospatial. Housing, probably more by happenstance, although I do really like the collaborative nature of the sector. That really appeals to me. I enjoy being able to speak with counterparts in other housing associations and discuss what we're working on. And previously, I still have good relationship with Alex Hill in Plestain, Andy Bradley from Sovereign when he worked there, James Jervis from Midland Heart. These types of people have been a great source of information and inspiration for me.
Amazing. So this is now the big question is, you've been at Orbit quite a while. It's like 14 years, isn't it? Can you tell us a bit about your history and how you joined Orbit and then became their GIS manager?
Yeah. Sure. So I was very fortunate when I joined Orbit that, first of all, they had seen the potential of GIS and already invested in desktop software. And then secondly, that they also recognised that they needed specialised personnel to help develop that. So through the years, my role title has changed many times, as has the directorate that GIS sits within at Orbit. So one of the benefits of GIS is that it reaches out across many parts of the business. So I have sat in many different directorates. But GIS at Orbit started with them trying to give the resource as an extra application that someone could tag on to their roles within the data and reporting team. And I have to shout out my old line manager, Dean Ballard, who tried to get his teeth into GIS. But it was quickly realised that GIS was more than just a new application, and that it was and still is a discipline all in itself, which needs someone who knows how to leverage the benefits of mapping and geospatial data.
Okay, that's awesome. I like the fact that you describe it as an individual discipline. I feel there's a lot of housing associations, like you said, they tie it in with either an asset data manager's role or someone within environmental services or grounds maintenance, and they kind of often merge it within that. So you've been at Orbit a while. Your role has been primarily around GIS, but your job title's changed. So what was the first major project you worked on when you were at Orbit?
Oh, wow. So the initial the initial big project at Orbit for going down the GIS route is, as it is for many housing associations, and it's that of grounds maintenance. And that in itself was such a huge undertaking, where you're starting from a blank canvas, and we've got to capture all of our grounds maintenance responsibilities. And for a company the size of Orbit, which is then had about 40,000 properties, it was still a big undertaking. And it actually took about 2 or 3 years to fully capture and digitize all of those grounds maintenance responsibilities. So you could also say it's a project that will never be 100% finished, because Orbit is constantly developing new estates which need capturing. We're always adapting and adding to that data as time goes on in new ways we hadn't anticipated, some of which I'll talk about later. But as part of that grounds maintenance data capture project, we also had to digitize our estates and block boundaries. And that in itself took some time as well. We've got about 2,000 estates, or just over 2,000 estates. And I remember many meetings with property managers and surveyors, poring over old plans, delineating our block boundaries within estates to get that information out of people's heads and centrally recorded within GIS. So that was the first major project. There have been bigger projects since then, but yeah.
That's all. So yeah, I mean, that's the general trend we're getting when we're talking to people on the show. Geospatial is really being brought in with very quick ROI for grounds maintenance. Now, as you said, when you began, you were the sole geospatial person. How's that changed over the years?
Wow, yes. I'm happy to say I'm not now the sole GIS person. We have now grown the team to 3. It's been somewhat organic, and I'm fortunate to work for an organisation with an innovative spirit, but growth has been driven by being able to demonstrate the business need and benefits of geospatial across operational and strategic teams. So initial growth was born out of the grounds maintenance data capture project to identify the extent of our estate boundaries and capture the real world digitally. We rely on bringing external data in as well as the internal knowledge. So that extra data in its purest form, as you'll be aware, Chris, was the detailed background mapping, the master map product from Ordnance Survey, the aerial imagery and ownership data in the form of land registry title extents. So with those data sets, other parts of the business quickly saw benefits that they could bring to their functions. So just to give an example, just the land registry data. When various operational teams, so tenancy teams, repairs, maintenance teams, started to realize that they could answer ownership and responsibility queries, visualize actual title boundaries through our GIS system, instead of contacting the land registry, I started to become inundated with just printing simple maps of title extents and sending them around the business. But as you can imagine, I quickly had a massive queue system where even a waiting time of a week or more was still quicker than waiting and getting the information separate from the land registry. My time was spent creating relatively simple requests and turning those around. I mean, that wasn't all. You can look at estates teams, and they wanted their maps of grounds maintenance per estate. Repairs teams wanted maps showing patterns of high volumes of repairs. Community investment teams wanted to see where deprivation was higher, so they could target funding at areas that need it the most. Demand grew like topsy. And as you know, Chris, visualizing geospatial data on a map can instantly account for several weeks of waiting or for hundreds of words of rows and data shown in any spreadsheet. So attention naturally had to shift, I think, to how we could allow the business to self-serve these relatively simple types of requests. So the next big project for me then kicked off at Orbit with introducing web mapping to the business over our intranet, and a system we have badged internally as My Maps. So that would then allow me to shift my focus on building and developing the web mapping solution across the business. We had to bring in somebody else, a second GIS role, to still carry on with that grounds maintenance project whilst I concentrated on designing how that self-service of geospatial data to the business would look. And what we badged as My Maps, we've given each different business function a unique way of looking at data, for the data that's unique to them. So as you might imagine, estates teams would be interested in grounds maintenance, but they wouldn't be interested in looking at all the demographic data, and vice versa. You might get a strategic part of the business that are looking at demographic data, but they wouldn't be interested in what grounds maintenance is there. So we've given each specific part of the business their own unique view.
So that's all on one big web map, and then the layers that they can see is dependent on their role or where they sit within the business.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it took some time to design and build that, but it gave us that ability then to get an extra GIS role within the business. And that's where the operational GIS analyst now sits and still carries on doing that work.
Oh, amazing.
But in a very similar vein, with me now concentrating on managing My Maps, rolling out training to staff, as well as fielding new requests, and with the operational GIS analyst dealing with the grounds maintenance side and also conveyancing requests, the strategic asset management team then started demanding additional GIS resource. So with requests, they subsequently had to go into a queuing system, and the strategic requests typically revolve around those what if type scenarios and questions, and creating maps based on different hypothetical scenarios. So this then created the need for an additional GIS role within the strategic part of the business as its main stakeholder. So now, very pleased to say we've got an excellent team. So Dimitri looks after the operational side, and Jamie looks after the strategic side of GIS.
That's amazing, hearing that organic growth and the business really valuing spatial information. So you've alluded a bit to it, but you've made a lot of savings at Orbit through your work. Can you tell us what kinds of savings you've made for the business? Yes,
some we can. So some savings are easier to quantify than others. So the easy one we can quantify is the grounds maintenance savings. And those savings we've attributed to being able to switch the relationship between our contractors, which used to be them telling us how much they were maintaining. And of course, with the grounds maintenance project, we're now able to tell them how much we want to be maintained. And that was the first real big win, and being able to move to that model. We immediately made savings of about £1 million per year on the basis of switching the direction of travel within that relationship between our contractors. So that's quite a while ago now that we completed that and made that shift. But yeah, that was a fantastic saving initially.
I mean, that 1 million a year, I mean, that's what, 12 years ago? I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, 11, 12 years ago, yeah.
That's huge, that savings.
Mm.
Even by today's standard, 1 million a year is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's many others as well. So we can also, to a lesser extent, we can identify cost savings with conveyancing. So when a property is sold, either through disposals or under the right to buy scheme, a plan of the property is included in sales packs from solicitors. which includes various conveyancing factors such as red line boundaries, rights of way, rights of access, boundary responsibilities, etc., etc. We now produce those plans in-house, and last year alone we produced over 250. Now, if these plans were drawn up by solicitors, we'd be paying them to create the plans. We conservatively estimate that each plan would cost about £200 each. When you scale that up, last year we made savings of just over 50k just on that function alone. So that just on that will pay for one of the analysts.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's it was one of the other wins that we had from just being able to show conveyancing teams what we can do with GIS. Once we got that data in, they said, well, this is fantastic. We can save money by being able to produce these plans in-house. So that's a quantifiable saving that we report on each year within the business and keeps people happy. But some of the savings are less quantifiable, but we know that there are definitely efficiencies that we're bringing to the business. So, for example, the ability to instantly query responsibilities on ownership extents via one or two clicks of a mouse within our web mapping resource. It's nigh on impossible to quantify how many times that saves the business, both in terms of savings in costs of not needing to download those plans from the land reg, and the savings in time for staff and the knock-on benefits to our customers and being able to resolve those queries quicker. So yeah, being able to quantify that is difficult because we just don't know how many times the resource is being used for that, but we know that it will be bringing benefits.
I was talking to Justin Chamberlain. He was on one of our podcasts, and he was telling me that what a lot of their staff do is they go through the web map to find the asset and then click on the link on the asset to take them to the asset information page, because it's quicker doing that than going through the actual system and finding the property they're looking for.
I have had similar comments from colleagues here as well, that people prefer to use MyMaps, the web GIS, because people find it easier to get key information from the housing management system rather than going through that. They can just click in through MyMaps and get what they need instantly. So, I mean, ultimately the data is all coming from the housing management system. It's just interesting how some people like to use the mapping system to get that data. But yeah, other savings that we can't quantify for repairs and maintenance teams. And they use our system and the Ordnance Survey background mapping and drawing and measurement tools at their desktop to create area management measurements for sites that need work. And what that does is negates the need to physically travel, potentially hours, to go there and measure the site physically on site. They can sit there with the reassurance that the Ordnance Survey have got a degree of tolerance in their mapping, and they can produce fairly accurate measurements just by sitting at their desk as well. So that's another sort of saving that is difficult to quantify, but we can definitely say we're bringing to the business.
That's another great one, isn't it? Just from my experience back in the organisation I was at, you would have people regularly having 2 or 3 Google Map pages open just to see, okay, I've got this property here, I've got that property there, I've got another property nearby, let's try and draw an area. And it was all a bit hodgepodgey, but knowing that with Ordnance Survey, you're right, they've got the tolerances and there's going to be the accuracy, that saves them time and energy. So that's really interesting. We've deliberately left out one of the savings within that, Section 38's adoptions. How have you been able to support Orbit with these, and do you know roughly how much you've been able to save with all that?
So yes, so we've got to be careful with terminology here. It's not a direct saving, what we call it's more a lifetime cost avoidance saving as opposed to any hard savings we can definitely say we've made. But what the cost avoidance saving is based upon is the premise that although we may hold the title for an area of land, the local authority under a Section 38 agreement have adopted the responsibility of repairing and maintaining that land at the expense of the taxpayer. So the lifetime element, when I say it's a lifetime cost avoidance saving, is the way that we say a piece of hard standing will last anywhere between 15 and 30 years. So we use 30 years as a conservative estimate in defining the lifetime of any piece of hard standing. So adoption data has to be available and is served from each local authority in one of three different ways. The most basic is a PDF list of streets on their website, and you can find that these PDF lists will have a description at the top that says all of the street and the pavement up to the hedge will be maintained at the expense of the taxpayer. That's one. The second way that local authorities serve that out is via their own public-facing GIS, and some local authorities have those, and you can go and interrogate them, and you can find lovely adoption layers there. The final way, though, is that you have to obtain evidence of the adoption via a direct request to the local authority. And that can incur a small charge depending on which local authority you're requesting that data from. So we have made an outlay. However, the last time we did that work, we found that we'd spent just over £3,500 on obtaining that evidence. So that's what we've spent to get the adoption data there. We've created a layer within our web mapping system that contains adopted land as a polygon, and we've provided links to the three different channels of evidence that we've collected from the local authority so that any staff member can instantly query a piece of land and identify whether it has been adopted and with the evidence source. And that evidence is a key part there. So, for example, we know and we can quantify how much it is to repair a square metre of hard surface such as tarmac or paving. And historically, we have calculated that cost to be approximately £65 per square metre. We can also quantify the average grounds maintenance cost attached to a square metre of land, which again, we've historically calculated to be £1.35 per square metre. Now, the last piece we did around the cost avoidance savings was about 3 or 4 years ago. And we have built on that slightly since. But when we did that piece of work, we'd captured 270,000 square metres of adopted public highways and 117,000 square metres of grounds maintenance land. So when you scale that up, we've calculated that we've made approximately £18 million worth of lifetime cost avoidance savings over those 30 years to those criteria I've just mentioned.
That's 18 million over 30 years. That's just over $500,000 a year.
Exactly. So, like I said, we have to be careful how we say that we're making these savings because they're cost avoidance savings. By giving the ability for staff to be able to instantly query a piece of land, whether it's been adopted or not, also has us a further benefit, cost saving, because if we didn't have that ability, we could be asking solicitors to do a search and review for that specific estate. And as you know, solicitors will charge you for that cost. And we have attributed a certain amount of savings just on that basis alone. But also, by being able to give staff access to that evidence from the local authority, we have had occasions where local authority will come to us and they'll say, "You're not maintaining this land, it's yours. The land registry is showing it's your land." And we can go back to them instantly and say, yeah, because you've adopted that land under a Section 38 agreement, and we can provide them with the evidence straight away. So it saves us an amazing amount of time and maybe possibly mistakes in just kowtowing to a local authority's demand that we need to maintain an area or repair an area. We can instantly say, no, that's not our responsibility. So we attribute, all those savings just down to that adoption project alone.
That's awesome. And I really like the last point about how your staff are empowered to be able to challenge local authorities by going, look, here's the evidence for that. There you go. I think that's a really fascinating bit of work, and the fact that you're able to quantify so much and also like the legal fees as well. I think that's a really powerful thing, how GIS and geospatial really supports housing. We're going to be talking something a bit aspirational in this sense, something you've been working on for the past several months. You guys have been working on quite a few interesting projects. Can you tell us a bit more about those interesting projects?
Yeah, sure. Jamie, for example, in my team, he's working on a fantastic land appraisal model with his key stakeholder, which is strategic asset management. And by working in conjunction with them, he's building this model to give them the ability to appraise the suitability of a location for development. So he's built a system to give selected staff members the opportunity to place a point on the map using our system, which then uses a sophisticated model, various weightings, which have been determined by several factors. Scores will alter based on the location, which dynamically changes the radius of a buffer, which is automatically created to include counts of existing properties within a specified distance to help with our densification model, for example. So there's many different attributes that go into that model, and I'm not sure when this podcast is going out, Chris, but on the 19th of November, Jamie will be presenting this model at the CAD-Core Housing Conference, and he will be going into detail about how he's built that model. But that's a fantastic resource for our strategic team to instantly just use my maps to put a point on the map, and it comes back with a score based on the suitability of that location. That's one piece of work that the team's working on. Another exciting project that we're doing is Dimitri in the operational team. He is developing a system to record biodiversity net gain improvements within our estates. So our busy environmental team, as part of our ambitious sustainability strategy, have aligned with the wider global 30 by 30 initiative. And that initiative states that 30% of our land should contribute positively to nature's recovery by the year 2030. As part of the work we did in the pilot for that scheme, we partnered with the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust to help us develop a way forward. And as part of that pilot, the Wildlife Trust took our grounds maintenance data for 4 different sites to assess the quality and suitability to use as a basis for recording biodiversity improvements, and also for helping identify habitat improvement schedules. After they looked at our data, I was delighted to hear back that they thought our grounds maintenance data was among the best they'd ever seen, and it was a very good starting point to use for recording biodiversity net gain. So our environmental sustainability team are making great progress improving the biodiversity within our estates, and we've adapted our grounds maintenance data to include a biodiversity score which indicates how soft landscaping is contributing to nature's recovery. By exporting that data from GIS into Power BI. We're then developing a dashboard to report the 30 by 30 KPIs to the business. And that's an ongoing project that we're heavily involved with there. So really interesting projects there.
I think both of those sound amazing. Touching about Jamie's one first, often when we talk about suitability for development, my past experience is often I know someone who's selling a bit of land, or we think this plot of land is probably a good idea to change from 4 houses into a block of 8 flats or something. That's been my past experience, but I'm really glad to see that your teams are really valuing spatial information. And I think the one quote which you said was really good there was it your local density plans or something?
Yeah,
where your
strategy.
Yeah, which I think that's fantastic, and I think a lot of other organisations can learn from what you're doing in that implementation for some really benefits. And then Dimitri's work on the biodiversity net gains, that's fascinating as well. And I love the fact that you've partnered with Warwickshire Wildlife Trust and how they've commented how good your data is. And that just shows the richness of grounds maintenance data when it's done right.
Well, I mean, if you'd have said when I first started, 14 years ago, that the data we were starting to capture then would still be being adapted, 14 years later, to improve our estates and the well-being that's associated with biodiversity improvements, I'd have been completely shocked back then. But yeah, once you start collecting and building the rich resource of grounds maintenance data, it's surprising how much you can adapt it further down the line.
I really like that, and I hope other housing associations listening follow suit as well. We're coming up to our last question, and this is now becoming our standard one. If you had an unlimited budget, what would you do with it?
Yeah, great question. I'd want to take over the world. No, seriously, if I had unlimited budget, I'd love to switch and build a centralized platform that became the brain of the entire housing operation. It would integrate everything: property data, maintenance, tenants, demographics, so that location was at the heart of every piece of data that we have here. It's a very ambitious thought, and it would involve lots of effort. But if we did have unlimited budget, I'd love that. And that's from a sort of system perspective. I guess we'd also like to be able to give the ability for customers and contractors the chance to interrogate our data on a public-facing GIS. So we don't have a public-facing one at the moment. There's a lot of costs associated with making that available to the public, but it's always been a sort of wish list of mine to be able to have that ability. Another way, I'd love to have access to all the data as well, Chris. So, you'll be aware of the public sector geospatial agreement, and I often look enviously at local authorities who have access to mapping just because they're a public sector body. Housing associations not quite there. We're as close to public that we can be. We're still being private, but I'd love to be able to have access to all of the data. I guess that's quite a common request from other counterparts. But I think finally there's a wider piece around sort of the culture of map reading in society, and I've seen various surveys that have been put out by the Ordnance Survey before on how much of the population can actually read maps. And I know just by rolling out training to staff here at Orbit, there is a percentage of people that they've not quite understood how geospatial works in relation to the real world. And I don't know if there's a piece there around education. Maybe if I had unlimited money, I'd like to see the ability to read maps given, or courses on map reading at an early age, so that everybody could understand the benefits of being able to get information from maps. Because I think there's a smallish population there that don't know how to read maps. So there's my three. I think I've got quite cheeky there. I've got three different ways that I'd like to use unlimited budget. But I don't know if any of those have been said before.
I don't think so, but usually I want to build better and bigger. And I know definitely at my former place, if I'd had a limited budget, I'd have just said, give me all the money for data, and I would have bought absolutely everything I could have. Especially now with OS's NPD data, which is really good, especially for buildings and things. Like the national data set for that's like from an individual to buy it, it's like £2.5 million. It's quite a lot of money. So I'd have loved that. It's like you said, a housing PGSA would be glorious, but that's going to be, whether that will happen or not is unknown. But Steve, thank you so much for today. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on. If anyone who's listened today wishes to get in touch, what's the best way for them to get hold of you?
Look out for me on LinkedIn. You can send me a private message on there and I'll respond to it.
Brilliant. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to be involved in the podcast, please feel free to get in touch. You can find us either on our LinkedIn page or head to our website at www.housinggeospatial.co.uk. Thank you so much for joining, and catch you all soon.
Thanks, Chris.